Hey, all right, it's time for week 2, lecture 1 on the whole discipline of ethics. So I'm just going to make a few caveats, or caveats. If you're from the Northeast, it's caveats. If you're from anywhere else, it's caveats. Um, I'm going to try to condense an entire course of ethics, which is a course we offer at Purdue, Phil 11100. And I'm going to try to condense this into one lecture. Well, actually, this entire week is kind of ethics week, so I'm basically going to do background information on the field of ethics as a whole before we start going to a subfield of that, which is, of course, global ethics. Uh, and just before I get started, I should give some justification for this. Your instructor is opinionated, and I honestly think that global moral issues should be a 300 level class. I think to really get the most out of these readings, you should have taken logic, critical thinking, ethics 111, intro to philosophy. But no, and I think it's a good thing though. A lot of senior political science majors, maybe. So it's not. I'm not saying it's horrible. It's a 100 level class. I'm just saying that a lot of the readings are going to be assuming some stuff that would be covered in other classes at more in depth. So that's why I'm spending time this week, and I spent time last week looking at arguments and just basic critical thinking skills, and this week we're going to look at the discipline of ethics as a whole. All right, so enough of me rambling. Let's just get into it. Actually, let me say one more thing before I start rambling. So you're going to see some of this material pop up again several times this week in the readings and presentations, especially when we get to what's called normative ethics, right there. And I'm doing this on purpose. So sometimes the best way to learn material is to kind of experience it at a bird's eye view, and read it, hear about it, write about it, and then study it more in depth. At kind of, I guess you could say, a worm's eye view, and also read it, listen to it, interact with it yourself. So basically, the stuff in the normative section, which where'd my mouse go? There it is where we're going to be spending most of our time on this week. And it's a good idea just to get as much exposure in many different ways as you possibly can to it, so it kind of just gets ingrained in your brain, and it'll help you throughout the rest of the semester. So you're going to see me repeat a lot of stuff this week. And if you've already taken ethics, and if you already know this stuff, then congratulations, you're ahead of your peers. And if you have not encountered this before, I'm doing this mainly for you, so that you can catch up, and so you can kind of learn this stuff. And this is good stuff to know in general anyways. You are all going to be active participating citizens, whether here or elsewhere, wherever you're from. And a lot of debates are going to be making certain normative ethical assumptions as well as meta-ethical assumptions. And it's good to know what those assumptions are. And the average citizen these days doesn't even know what ethical assumptions guide their thinking. I'll explain more about that in a bit. Okay, so before we move on, the discipline of ethics is divided into 3 subdisciplines: metaethics, which is what we're going to spend most of our time in this lecture talking about, normative ethics, and applied ethics. Global ethics is a subdiscipline of both normative and applied ethics. Well, I said confused yet, but that shouldn't be that confusing. So we're going to, like I said, we're going to look at metaethics. So the term meta means after or beyond. It's, like I said, it's a bird's eye view of the project of ethics as a whole. It studies, in a sense, the origin and meaning of ethical concepts. So, for example, good, bad, just, fair, wrong, naughty, vicious, praiseworthy, evil, and so on. Now, I bet you, throughout the day, you global morology students, you make judgments all the time, invoking one of these concepts over here. Perhaps many times unreflectively. So you're driving in traffic and someone cuts you off and you say that person's bad or naughty or vicious, or that was just a mean thing to do, or that was a stupid thing to do. They're a maniac. They should have their driver's license taken away. You yourself help an old lady with her bags to her car from the front of the grocery store, and you say, well, that was a nice thing I did. That was good. That was praiseworthy. Your roommate oversleeps and hits the snooze button on the alarm clock 25 times in a row, ruining your morning, and you think, that was annoying, that was unfair, that was wrong. So my own point is that you make moral judgments all day long. Metaethics studies where these concepts come from, basically. So think about it. Worms probably don't make moral judgments. Squirrels, even if they do make something like moral judgments, I don't think they're nearly as rich or fine-grained or as sophisticated as anything human beings do. Computers, I think at this point in 2013 they can simulate some moral judgments that we make, but I don't think computers, at least in 2013, are making genuine moral judgments. Even really sophisticated animals like dolphins and very advanced primates like chimpanzees and gorillas, they make something that we could call proto-moral judgments, P-R-O-T-O. But a full-fledged rich moral judgment, the time that we would make, probably start making, if you study psychology, Kohlberg's theory of moral development, the type of moral judgments that like mature individuals make, it's just us. It's just humans. There might be an alien species as well out there that does it, but for right now, this is us. And we have this rich moral vocabulary, we make these rich moral judgments. It's interesting where and why. Why do we do this? Where did these concepts come from? And what are you to make of them? What that means is like, we make mathematical judgments all the time. 2 plus 2 equals 4. Well, we just assume that's true. Well, what makes it true that 2 plus 2 equals 4? Well, we make moral judgments all the time. It's wrong to beat little helpless babies up with baseball bats for pleasure. It's a horrific example, and that's why I'm using it, because I don't think anyone's going to question me on that. So the question is, what makes that moral judgment true? What is it out there in reality that makes it true that it is wrong to beat helpless babies with baseball bats? So we know what makes it true that water is H2O is because that's just the chemical composition of that liquid clear stuff that's in our lakes and falls from the sky. We know that it's true that bodies accelerate at a certain rate when dropped from a point in the sky towards the ground because we've measured it. We've done the calculations. We've done experiments. Well, what makes it true? What makes our moral judgments true? Or at least some of our moral judgments. And that's what metaethics studies. Now, we're going to see that there's going to be a range of answers that metaethicists are going to give to these questions. And let's look at some of them today. So, real quickly though, it's a broad range of subtopics, including moral semantics. Semantics just means meaning. It's like linguistics, I guess. It's moral linguistics, the origin and meaning and function of our moral language. Moral epistemology. I'm going to explain what epistemology means in the next slide. Metaphysical issues. I'm going to explain what metaphysical issues also means in one of the next slides. And psychological issues. Caveat, I have a silly picture of Britney Spears, who we all know a few years ago had some psychological issues of her own. I hope you don't mind me picking on celebrities. I'm not really picking on her. I'm using her as an illustration. So yeah, I say yes, there are even the type of psychological issues associated with mental illnesses. There is a whole literature on neurological and psychological disorders and what bearings they have on the nature of morality for all of us human beings. We're not going to cover that in this class. It's a fascinating field, though. There's actually, in the past few years, been a whole explosion of literature on psychopaths and what they mean for the rest of us in terms of ethics because of how they make moral judgments, the actual neural mechanisms involved in when a psychopath makes a moral judgment. Okay. But when we mean psychological issues, we mean just like these are cognitive content when we make moral judgments, or instead are we just expressing emotions? So, and I'll explain that in the next few slides. Real quickly, epistemology. This is the study of knowledge. Episteme, it just means knowledge. Ology, the study of like archaeology, biology, all the ologies. Okay, anthropology. All right, so moral epistemology is the study of moral knowledge. For example, when, if ever, does someone know that X is morally thus and so? That could mean X is wrong, stealing is wrong, or telling the truth is good. Do we even know moral truths at all? Skeptics would say, no, we never know moral truths. Realists would say, yeah, we do know some moral truths. Okay. Metaphysics. This is the ultimate study of reality, and yes, I mean ultimate in the literal sense of the word ultimate. It metaphysics is like the biggest questions you can ask. Does God exist? Do we have free will? Is the world ultimately physical or non-physical? Epistemology, real quick, one question is like, do we know reality? Do we actually have any knowledge of physical objects? Or could it be the case that we're in the matrix? That's epistemology. Metaethics would say, is the stuff we know physical or non-physical? Is, like, for all we know, we're just a bunch of souls with sensory ideas, but we're not actually physical beings. And there's really smart philosophers in time and history that have argued that. But we're not going to look at that because this is global ethics. Okay. Metaphysical metaethics asks, are there mind-independent moral truths? And if so, what are they? Mind-independent moral truths. What do I mean by mind-independent moral truths? Well, we're going to elaborate that in the next slide. So it's appropriate to move on to the next slide. A subdiscipline within metaphysics and ethics, or actually metaphysical metaethics, there's a position known as objectivism. Now, I've got a picture of Ayn Rand with a big red X over her. That's because objectivism in metaethics is not the same thing as objectivism as a type of, I guess, political philosophy that Ayn Rand advocated in the 20th century. It's the same word, but it's got different meanings. Just like the word bear can mean bear with me, and it can also mean that thing that roams around in national parks. Same spelling, that's it. So this is what I mean by objectivism. I say there are mind-independent moral truths. By mind-independent, I mean there are moral truths that are true independently of whether or not human beings believe or agree that they are true. So to elaborate, moral truths would be like mathematical truths. So for example, 2 plus 2 equals 4. That's going to be true even if there are no human beings around that acknowledge it or admit that or study mathematics. Suppose we just weren't that smart. Okay, so I think that's trivial, the mathematical part. Well, moral realists or moral objectivists say that there are also moral truths that are true, whether or not any human being wants to admit it. So I'm going to use, again, the horrible but trivial example. Using little babies in place of footballs would be a morally wrong change to the sport of football, whether or not anyone acknowledged it. Okay, so suppose everyone in the NFL got behind the baby rule. We'll just call it the baby rule, where we use babies instead of footballs. It wouldn't matter according to moral objectivists. It would still be wrong, even if no one thought it was wrong. Of course, I wonder what little baby would think. Probably would. Maybe there would be one dissenting voice. Okay. One more point. Objectivism is not to be confused with what's called absolutism. So we hear in the newspapers these stupid moral absolutists. Now, I think there's some very smart moral absolutists out there, so I'm not going to say that. But it's not the same. It's a type of objectivism, but it's not all objectivist moral theories are absolutist, whilst all absolutist moral theories are objectivist. Absolutists hold that there are, absolute moral requirements, which are requirements that are always hold regardless of the circumstance. So an example would be lying. Suppose you're a moral absolutist and you think lying is absolutely wrong. That means lying is always wrong, regardless of the situation. So if you're hiding Jews in your attic during World War II, and there's an SS guard at your door asking you if you're hiding Jews, and you, the moral absolutist, believe that lying is wrong, then you, the moral absolutist, would hold that it's also wrong to lie to the SS guard, even if it would result in the SS guard killing the Jews in your attic. So I want to say this. Most moral philosophers who are moral objectivists are not absolutists in that sense. They would say that the right thing to do does depend on the situation, but it's an objective fact of what the right thing is to do. Okay. This is contrasted with what's called moral subjectivism. One more brief aside. In this class, most of the literature we read, most of the articles, are going to be objectivists. We're not going to really read any subjectivists. There might be an exception or two, but for the most part, most people working in this field are objectivists. And then I'll explain what subjectivism is, and I'll explain why I think most are going to be objectivists. So a subjectivist in metaethics is, we'll just say it's a non-objectivist. It's someone who denies that there are mind-independent moral truths. And they come in many flavors, like ice cream. There's moral relativists. Okay? Moral relativists hold that moral truths are true only relative to one's culture. For example, it is true that relative to the Southeast, you ought to respect your elders by saying ma'am and sir, and I'm from the Southeast, I'm from North Carolina, and that's true, although it's becoming less true. In the Northeast, it's not as true. If you're in Northeast and you say ma'am or sir, it might be offensive, because you'd be implying that someone's old, and no one wants to be old. Whereas in the South, if you don't say ma'am or sir, you're offensive, because you're not showing the respect due to your elders. So a moral relativist would hold that all moral judgments are like that. Killing is wrong in the United States. In other places in time, it might be okay. So cannibalism, we take cannibalism to be wrong here. In other cultures, it's been a very wide practice. So it's just the truth of your moral claims, and it will be dependent on what culture you're making or what society. Okay. For the record, I'm not really a moral non-objectivist at all. Your instructor is an objectivist, and like I said, most of the readings you're going to read are objectivist. And I think I'll just make another presentation at some point on why I think moral relativism is false, but I think it's actually contradictory, and I'll explain it in another presentation. Moral subjectivists, also a type of non-objectivism. They hold that moral truths are true, but not relative to cultures or societies. Instead, it's just relative to individuals. You get to decide your own morality. That's what a moral subjectivist believes, basically. So you might think that killing is wrong, and someone else might think it's okay. Well, it's true if you think it's wrong, and it's false if you think it's okay. That's it. You, I guess, determine your own morality. Error theorists. You're probably not going to encounter this much, but it is a position, so I'll just present it. It was originally introduced by this philosopher named J.L. Mackie. It's a very recent version. The other two have been around for a long time, a couple thousand years. So an error theorist holds that all moral judgments are false. There are no moral truths, but there's a lot of moral falsehoods. So basically, an error theorist says that moral judgments actually have what's called a truth value. Moral judgments are capable of being either true or false. But it just so happens all moral judgments are false, because there's no such thing as these moral facts, these weird moral facts. There's physical facts, biological facts, but there's no moral facts. It's kind of weird. So your belief that torturing babies is wrong is false. However, suppose Bob has a belief that torturing babies is good. Well, his is also false, because all moral judgments are false, even the ones that contradict each other. So stealing is wrong, false. Stealing is not wrong, false. Lying is wrong, false. Lying is not wrong, false. Murder is wrong, false. Murder is not wrong, false. Again, I'm just presenting a logical space. It's a weird theory. I think error theory is false. And if you ever want to know why, take Ethics 111 with me. Finally, in the space of non-objectivist meta-ethical moral theories, we're going to look at a theory called emotivism, or perhaps non-cognitivism. So remember when I mentioned that error theory holds that moral judgments have a truth value, they're just all false. Objectivism says that all moral judgments have truth values as well, and many of them are true. Emotivism says that moral judgments don't even have a truth value. They're not capable of being true or false. So think about it. Many claims we make are capable of being true or false. Statements that describe reality in some way, like the sky is blue, water is wet, the earth is the third planet from the sun, 2 + 2 = 4. These are descriptive claims that in some sense describe reality. And they're true or false. If they accurately describe reality, they're true, and if they misrepresent reality in some sense, they're false. Okay, error theory says that moral statements are not like that. They're not capable of being true or false. So what are they then? According to emotivists, moral judgments are really expressions of emotions. So for example, when you say torturing innocent babies is wrong, you're really saying, boo, torturing innocent babies, as opposed to saying something that actually is true or false, like 2 + 2 = 4. So, so according to emotivists, moral judgments are just expressions of emotions. Boo, or yay, something like that. All right, let's take there's not much to say about psychology and ethics. Well, there's a lot to say about it. I'm not going to say much about it. But there's several different views. Egoism and altruism. Egoism is self, altruism is others concerned. So there's psychological egoism, and this is a view that holds that all human actions are motivated by self-interest. Psychological hedonism holds that all human actions are motivated by pleasure and avoidance of pain. And then there's psychological altruism, which says that at least some of our actions are motivated by instinctive benevolence. Most economists are either psychological egoists or psychological hedonists, by the way. The discipline of economics, at least all the stuff I've read, which I'm not an economist, so I'm, of course, reading outside my field, but most of the stuff I've read actually, they don't hide it, they just state it. Yeah, they state the assumption that humans are inherently egoistic, and they try to organize economic systems based on that assumption. So they make an assumption about human nature, and it's that psychological egoism. There is an abundance of evidence in biology and in psychology that we are, in fact, altruistic a lot of times. Okay, and there's another distinction, and I've already talked about this, but it's worth drawing again, the relationship between emotion and reason. Now, according to a lot of contemporary neuroscientists, that distinction's not as clear-cut as it used to be. It's not like there's cognition and then emotion. In fact, a lot of cognition is emotional, and a lot of emotions are actually very cognitive in nature. But we'll make the distinction anyways. There's non-cognitivists, emotivists, for example, which says that moral judgments don't have cognitive content. And then there are cognitivists, like moral objectivists, that hold that moral judgments are representational. They're capable of being true or false. Okay, so that's kind of just the train of metaethics. And again, an entire semester's worth of stuff in 20 minutes. Now let's look at normative ethics. I'm not going to say as much in this lecture about normative ethics because most of the readings in the rest of the lectures this week will be on normative ethics, but it's good to introduce this. So normative ethics involves arriving at moral standards that regulate right and wrong conduct. So it's less of a scientific enterprise. It's more like practical guidance. It's got a different aim. So it attempts to offer a litmus test for proper human behavior. So, for example, you've heard this from your parents. It's called the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You can apply this rule to just about all your behavior. Before you're about to do something, you'd say, well, would I like someone to do this to me? And if the answer is yes, then you can do it. And if the answer is no, you don't. Well, normative ethics is kind of like that. They try to find a few principles or a single principle that can guide or regulate human conduct. And they try to explain all human moral judgments based as somehow deriving from these few or this one principle. Here's a key assumption of normative ethics. There's only one ultimate criterion of moral conduct, which would be a single rule or set of principles. We're going to look at a few of those today. So there's different normative theories that give different answers to what that criterion is. The first normative theory is what's called virtue ethics, virtue theories. A normative theory is a virtue theory if it stresses developing good habits of character. So, for example, you should acquire benevolence, in which case you would then habitually act benevolently towards others. And they emphasize virtues: wisdom, courage, temperance, justice. And what should guide your behavior is, would a virtuous person do this? Then so should I. Would a vicious person do this? Then I should not do it. And if you're ever looking to buy a bicycle, go to Virtuous Cycles in downtown Lafayette. They make great bikes. Virtuous, and I actually put that slide up there for a reason. So virtuous doesn't just apply to human character traits. It comes from this Greek word erete, which means like excellence. So like a well-made chair would be an excellent chair of its kind. It would have virtues or certain good qualities. And a human being that's virtuous have good qualities. You want a virtuous roommate. You don't want a vicious roommate who drinks too much, mistakes your closet for a bathroom, sleeps in, never pays rent on time. You want, that would be a vicious roommate. A virtuous roommate would pay the rent on time. They would not mistake your closet for a bathroom. Okay, duty theories. One last point about virtue theories. We're not going to spend much time in this class discussing them. They haven't made that much of an impact on the field of global ethics yet, but it's a very rich field. Duty theories, though, will play a much bigger role in global moral issues, so we'll spend more time on that. Duty theories of ethics, they base morality on specific foundational principles of obligation. They're called deontological, and it's from the Greek word deon, which means duty, and then ology, which is the study of. I say they are non-consequential theories because the principles or duties are obligatory, irrespective of any consequences that might follow. And we're about to look at consequentialist theories, and that make more sense. Here's a real-world example. You're against torturing others, even if using torture could have desirable consequences, such as you could save lives with the intelligence you get from torturing someone. If you're against torturing, no matter what, you would be like a deontologist. Those who defend rights tend to be deontologists, because a right is a justified claim against another person's behavior. My right to not be killed unjustly entails an obligation on your part not to unjustly kill me. Consequentialist theories. This is, I guess, the main competitor to the duty theories of ethics. According to consequentialism, we are obligated to act in such a manner that has the best consequences. The consequences of actions are what determine the action's moral status. Actions with bad consequences are bad, and actions with good consequences are, well, they're good. So, if torturing someone has better consequences than not torturing them, then if you're a consequentialist, you should torture them. If lying has better consequences than not, then you should lie. If telling the truth has better consequences, then you should tell the truth. Now, we think like consequentialists all the time. In fact, we make consequentialist judgments all the time, and I would say that we make true consequentialist judgments all the time. So, here's an example that we hear all the time. Suppose you drive a trolley, okay? Now, down the track, to the left, there's a person tied to the track. It's just one human being. And then suppose the track splits to the right as well. So you get to a fork in the track. On the left fork, there's one person tied to the track. On the right fork, there are 5 people tied to the tracks. Suppose further that you found out that the brakes on the trolley don't work. That thing is not stopping. It's just going to go no matter what. The only decision you can make that will influence the trolley is what direction it goes. Either the left, killing one person, or the right, killing 5 people. Most people would go to the left and they would kill one person, but they wouldn't kill 5. Why? Because it's a better consequence to have only killed one person than it is to have only killed 5 people. So that's a consequentialist moral judgment that someone could make. And it's an extreme example, but we make decisions like this all the time. So it's ingrained in our thinking. So the most well-known version of consequentialism is what's called hedonist utilitarianism, which holds that we are obligated to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. So the action that has more pleasurable and painful consequences is good, and the one with more pain is bad. All right, last slide for this presentation. Applied ethics. What is applied ethics? It's a branch of ethics. So, like I said, global ethics kind of touches on applied ethics. Applied ethics is like the most particular, fine-grained, closest to reality, less general form of ethics. It deals with real-world cases. It's a branch of ethics that examines specific and controversial moral issues. And I said there are 2 specific features. 2 features of applied ethics, specific and controversial. So, for example, inquiring to the definition of good or evil would be a topic for metaethics or normative ethics because the definition of good or evil is relevant to, all moral issues. It's not specific enough. Instead, applied ethics will accept specific moral issues, like famine, or abortion, or the death penalty, or gay rights, or global warming, and asks what should be done. But I also said that it examines controversial moral issues. So these are basically cases in which the correct moral choice isn't always obvious. There's lots of disagreement among very reasonable parties. Or they have different moral principles that lead to different conclusions, or where moral principles collide. So non-controversial stuff isn't really something that's studied by applied ethics. Because there's no need to. It's not controversial. It's evidence. Okay, that please all.